Hello, I'm O Min. There's a philosopher named David Hume. He argued that when something happens first in time and then something else follows, and this pattern repeats, humans conclude this causes that. But in truth, there's no solid proof for that. Hume's statement is close to a philosophical truism, but to common sense, it sounds like nonsense. This point is actually far more important than most people realize. When deciding what is true, which hypotheses are meaningful, or which claims are worth examining, his statement matters greatly. It's critically important. In statistics, it's considered especially vital. That's enough for you to get the gist. Kant, shocked by Hume's ideas, summarized it like this: we can't know for sure if causality exists in nature itself, but being an optimist, he assumed it does. Humans, of course, aren't wise enough to grasp all causal relationships. Yet Kant's analysis says our brains are built in such a way that we can't help but see the world that way. When one thing happens, then another follows, and this repeats, and we begin to behave like Pavlov's dogs, deciding that A causes B. So when A happens, we automatically expect B. That's how causality shapes our way of seeing the world. But there has to be some logical link. If there's no logical connection, associations like Pavlov's dogs won't form. Now here's my main point for today. If you're thinking of investing in Bitcoin for the long term, you must not focus on individual events. Let me take an example. Let's say you wake up on Saturday morning and find Bitcoin crashed overnight. When something like that happens, the news media will rush to explain why. They give you all sorts of explanations. Just as Kant said, they have to explain the cause. So they pour out different stories. And if something happened before Bitcoin's drop, it's automatically considered a possible cause because the timing fits. If something occurred beforehand, they'll claim it caused Bitcoin's crash. That's how these stories get built. And if it matches the theory already in our minds, we tend to accept it. When chatting with your friends, it's fine to just say, that's why Bitcoin fell. But once we get used to that habit, the next time something similar happens, we'll react automatically. Those of us who've studied academically often like to analyze events in terms of cause and effect. Indeed, analyzing the world through causality is actually a basic human instinct. Even without formal learning, any normal person sees the world that way. So crafting a convincing causal story isn't really a high-level intellectual task. It's something every human does. We don't just see things as they are. We frame them within a cause and effect context. That's how we view events. It's our habit. Even brief, fleeting moments are seen through that lens. That's why we sometimes think we saw something we didn't. It's something like this. Imagine there's a person nearby and a rock comes flying. You might testify in court that the person threw it, even if you didn't actually see him do it. You saw the rock fly. He was right there, and that alone makes you conclude he threw it and testify as if you had seen it. You might even remember it that way, because that's the pathway our minds naturally take. So true high-level intelligence, surprisingly, is the ability to doubt causality, to question it, not to invent it, but to doubt the causal links we think we see. This is very useful when distinguishing science from conspiracy theories. If you read popular conspiracy theories, they all sound pretty convincing, because they exploit our human tendency to create causal links, and that's exactly how conspiracy theories are made. Yesterday I said to a friend, someone I've known for a very long time, hey, doesn't this mean there's a serious problem? What I was reacting to was this. Someone claimed that a certain group owns 1/3 of all Bitcoin. Now this friend and I have for years worked on Bitcoin-related projects together and shared many discussions. He's recently become a Bitcoin maximalist. He practically worships Bitcoin, though I keep some distance from that view, calling it almost sacred, even outright sacred. That's the kind of person he is. So when he said, oh, so that's why this is happening, I was floored. It was honestly shocking to me. Because if someone really does own 1/3 of all Bitcoin, if a single entity holds that, then Bitcoin is no longer sound money. Regardless of whether that's even possible, if it were true, your rational move right now would be to dump Bitcoin. Get off the Titanic called Bitcoin. That would be the sane thing to do. So those two ideas can't coexist. Bitcoin is perfectly sound money, almost sacred, yet one group owns 1/3 of it. That simply doesn't add up. but people project causality so freely that they don't even realize they're addicted to these causal narratives. What wakes you up from that addiction is David Hume. At some point, you need to filter this out, especially in Korea's media environment. We're overexposed to that addiction. That's why the so-called educated people, when talking about Bitcoin, a strange and unfamiliar phenomenon, end up spinning their own stories and spewing unfiltered causal claims. Bitcoin's price, it swings a lot. That's just how it is. Volatility is built into it. So the first step is to admit we don't know. We don't truly know why Bitcoin's price drops or why it rises. That's the starting point. But if before Bitcoin crashes, some event takes place, that event looks like the likely cause. For example, US stock prices tank, or something similar happens. We quickly flag it as a prime suspect. But even that is highly questionable. Even without such events, Bitcoin can still swing this much. Another mindset you need to watch out for is this. Our language, despite what you might think, is not all that analog. It's surprisingly digital. Look closely at how we talk. Bitcoin fell. It fell by X%. But before we get into numbers, a drop is immediately linked in our minds to it's over or it's doomed. That's the instant association, 0 and 1. It's like our thinking runs on binary. Of course, with enough zeros and ones, you can get more nuanced. Our language tends to work this way. At least that's how I see it. And with that kind of language, people can manipulate, frame, and construct narratives. It's done by writers like me, journalists, academics, or people writing papers. These people know exactly how to use language to grab as much attention as possible and to phrase things so others agree with them. They know it well, and they use it well. In the media, headlines are inevitably a competition. And in competing for headlines, you have to grab people's attention instantly. And our attention, surprisingly, is a dynamic kind of attention. So our gaze isn't static. Our eyes aren't designed to notice things that stay still. They're designed to detect movement. Evolutionary biologists say it's because our ancestors needed to hunt. There's actually a military drill about this. It's called base defense training. At least that's how I remember it. Special forces often use a tactic that exploits our poor ability to detect stillness. They take advantage of it. Imagine a barbed wire fence on a hillside, and they're crossing it from outside. The method they use? They move only 30 centimeters per hour. At night, if they were to move quickly in the dark, rushing their bodies forward, they'd make noise stepping on grass, and that noise would immediately draw attention. But moving just 30 centimeters in an hour, especially by someone trained to do it, means it's almost imperceptible. It looks like they're not moving at all. We're surprisingly good at spotting movement, but bad at noticing what doesn't move. That's the point. Our eyes are tuned to dynamic observation, not to static observation. So when Bitcoin's price drops, the media floods in with headlines designed to grab all that dynamic attention. And what gets imprinted in your mind is this idea. Bitcoin unfolds as a series of events. Bitcoin becomes an event in your head. If you're not investing in Bitcoin, fine. But if you are investing and you see Bitcoin as just a chain of events, you're bound to fail. It's like raising a child. When you raise kids, what do you remember? When your kid grows 5 centimeters a year, do you actually notice it? No, you just look one day and suddenly realize they've grown. But your memories of them are tied to certain events. Now, which one is the real truth? Is it the events you remember that define a child's growth? Or is it the times you don't notice while they're sleeping, eating, or studying at school when they grow little by little, almost imperceptibly? Is that quiet, gradual growth the truest story of their life? We might say they're both true. That's a fair thought, but if an exceptionally sharp mind were to analyze it, those events we think raised us might not be as decisive as we believe. It could be the unseen changes, the invisible growth, and the imperceptible declines. Those could be the truly decisive factors, but our cognitive wiring isn't built to catch them. We latch onto certain events and the narratives surrounding them because those are what we remember. So we end up thinking that those events must have great meaning. Now don't misunderstand me. Some events truly do carry deep meaning for us, but even then, it might not be just that one event. What shows up as the event, whatever we label as the event, might have simply surfaced or been packaged in a certain way. bundled together with other moments, as if they were all part of one story. The single event you notice is, in fact, the sum of many smaller events. And what actually shaped them might be your attitude toward life, your worldview, your vision. Those could be the truly decisive elements. So please, think of this as just one perspective for today. It's too complex for me to plant some fixed thesis in you right now. It's a tricky concept. But I hope it still helps, because from the perspective of someone deeply in Bitcoin, I see so many people who, like David Hume observed, take the causal framework in their own head and truly believe it reflects reality. In fact, it often doesn't. What's really happening is often invisible, just slow, steady change. But people still convince themselves otherwise. That's something I've noticed a lot. Of course, the media will present a shallow causal frame, as they always have. The problem is people don't dismiss it, they overreact. They forget that reality is different. Instead of keeping the right model in their minds, they actually believe the events drive everything. So if Tether gets indicted in the US, they think the price will fall. If Mt-Gox-related articles appear and payouts are made, the price will crash. Bitcoin collapses. If a Bitcoin ETF is approved, it soars again. They see Bitcoin as just a string of such events, but that gives it no real direction. If you only focus on those events, it becomes a series of coincidences, basically a roll of the dice. But even those events exist within a broader context, within a certain state of things. Even during Bitcoin's winter, the Bitcoin ecosystem was constantly receiving inflows of capital from outside, and not just a little, very steadily. A massive amount, in fact. These so-called events are like pebbles thrown into a lake. Ripples form, but they don't fundamentally change the nature of the lake. And waves are always there anyway. The wind blows, waves form. So ripples on the surface are always there. It's a constant. So what should you be looking at? Imagine you're standing by the lake shore, watching the waves. Should you be reacting to them, writing about them, talking about them, asking questions about them, and searching for answers about them? Or should you focus on the lake itself, on whether the water level of the whole lake is rising? That's what you should be looking at. I once went sea fishing with my son, and on our way back from the shore, I remembered that when we arrived, it was all water. But when we left the shore, we had to walk through an area that had completely turned to mud. The tide comes in and goes out, we all know that. But seeing it with your own eyes still feels amazing. Yet when you're fishing, you barely notice it. Why? Because the water keeps moving back and forth, lapping gently at the shore. So, while it's lapping like that, you can't tell if it's going out or coming in. Local residents know exactly which it is, because they live in rhythm with it. But for outsiders like us, we can't tell if the tide is coming in or going out. So while fishing, if the tide is coming in, you could end up stranded. That's how weak we are at perceiving overall conditions right now. The media looking at Bitcoin from the outside, and even people around you, don't they view Bitcoin the same way? If you see it like that, you're still an outsider. If you step inside the Bitcoin world, study it for years like I have, and observe it closely, you'll see that the waves, the choppiness, is a constant. What matters is whether the water level itself rises or falls. But those who only see it from outside focus on the fact that when a boat passes by, waves rise higher for a moment and crash harder. That doesn't last, because Bitcoin, now an 11-year-old system, has sustained this state all along. The inflows into it don't just change suddenly based on events. They keep coming. Even if the price drops, it will rise again. So where on earth did this idea come from? That one entity holds 6 million Bitcoins. That shows a complete lack of understanding of Bitcoin. If someone really could hold millions of Bitcoins and swing the market, that wouldn't be the Bitcoin. We know it'd be a pump and dump stock. You should run from that immediately. You can't hold both ideas at once. If you claim Bitcoin is sound money, you need to consider what sound money truly means before making that claim. We need to observe Bitcoin with the mindset that we are moving closer to this grand premise, that Bitcoin is sound money. That's how we should be watching it. And so far, Bitcoin has been relatively successful at embodying that. These rumors that pop up whenever the price is bad, they come from people who seem to know something, but know nothing. Just because you can phrase a causal link in a sexy way, does that really make you look smart? David Hume would say, That's just something any human does. Anyone could phrase it beautifully. However, the truly intelligent, the ones who think scientifically, they doubt causality. Causality is not a property of the world. It's a habit of our perception. Thank you.